it's a long and hard journey with lots of, it feels like sometimes it's a setback, but it doesn't really setback. It's a side step. Like I just heard during the space architecture technical committee gathering that there's no failure, just unexpected results. And that is very true for R&D.
My guest this week is Eszter Gulacsi. Eszter has a Master's in Architecture and Engineering from the Budapest University of Technology and Economics, and she has a Master's in Space Studies from the International Space University. Eszter worked for a time with the European Space Agency, developing space radiation shielding, and currently Eszter operates as the co-founder and CEO of AstroSpArch. Eszter, welcome to STEM with Mr. N.
Thank you, Stuart. It was a really nice introduction. It's nice to hear what I did already.
Yes, well, you've got lots of great achievements, and it'll be interesting speaking to you about some of them. But can we just start off with, what is AstroSpArch and what do you do?
AstroSpArch is basically a space architecture startup, but because space architecture is such an emerging field, it is, I wouldn't say unfortunately, but it necessarily brings research and development into the field, because every challenge we face requires an innovative solution. So we need to do R&D as well, although we would just want to design for future generations, but that's not possible. We haven't done any designing, I have to admit that. Our work is now currently developing space radiation shieldings with the radiation experiment at the NASA Space Radiation Laboratory in May. More than a month ago. It feels like I came back 2 weeks ago from the US. So we are trying, and it's a long and hard journey with lots of, it feels like sometimes it's a setback, but it doesn't really setback. It's a side step. Like I just heard during the space architecture technical committee gathering that there's no failure, just unexpected results. And that is very true for R&D.
That's actually a very good way to look at things, and a very good way to look at things in life as well. That if you look at it that way, there's no failures, just unexpected results. It's quite a positive, quite a positive approach. And you'd obviously mentioned in there that you've been developing space radiation shielding. What is space radiation shielding?
In space, you have two sources of radiation. One is the sun, which creates all kinds of different radiations, and we can shield against it, and it's directional. So you always know where the sun is, so you always know where the radiation coming from, it has a vector. But the other one is the galactic cosmic rays, which are coming from outside of our galaxy. And that is isotropic, in a word. It's everywhere at the same time. It's constant. It doesn't have a direction. It's really everywhere. And it doesn't have, you know, the same as the sun, as sometimes you shut it down because it's on the other side of the earth. It's always. And that is very, very heavy particles going very fast. So it can do a lot of damage. It's called ionizing radiation because it doesn't have ions. When it impacts a material, it rearranges it. So you can imagine that, I mean, if it can do with any material on a biological being like us, it can do a lot of damage. So that is radiation. And right now, there are some research into it, how to protect the crew for Lunar Gateway and then to go to Mars. But The main research is for habitats on the Moon and Mars. So it's an extraterrestrial environment where you have partial gravity and you can build not just the shielding, let's say structures, but everything else using regolith. We call it in situ resource utilization, because you can use what you find on the Moon and the Mars. So that is radiation reduction for you.
And it sounds like a really interesting field you're working in, and we've spoken a lot there, obviously, about the radiation reduction. What other things are classed as space architecture?
Space architecture is basically related to everything that involves a human being or involves activities by human beings. You would say that it's easier to understand if you imagine terrestrial architecture, what we are doing here, residential design, but outside, beyond Earth, in orbit, so satellites. It can involve the launch vehicle if there will be a human being inside. So again, whatever requires human activities, that would be related to space architecture. Just focus on the human factors. So again, it ties up with why space architects are needed now, and we weren't needed in 1960. The reason, because at the beginning, basically engineers were enough, because the main focus was to keep these humans alive. It didn't matter in what circumstances, in what environment, but just to keep them alive. But the missions got longer and longer. Now crew can stay on the International Space Station for 6 months. Or if something happens and they can't come back, like now with the new capsule, then it's getting longer and longer. It will be the same if we go to the Moon. We are not going to be there for 6 months. If we go to Mars, it's not going to be a short-term thing. So, and I'm not even talking about the transit, which is also at least 180 days there. So it's going to be long, which means that we need to ensure that the crew can do their job, their cognitive performance can stay really high, because it's a dangerous environment. I'm not saying that engineers are not important. They are still the most important, because the bottom line, the primary goal is still keeping astronauts alive. But it's getting more and more important to help with their daily life. I would say to create comfort, but it's just a very, very tiny part of the whole. Like wires. So if you, just 2 examples, if you are surrounded by noise all the time, it's going to affect your brain. Even if you train your brain beforehand to be able to sleep, if it's very noisy, it's going to affect your brain. It's going to get tired. So you won't be able to perform the way you want to be. Or seeing all those wires, clutter wherever you look. It means your brain constantly analyzing all the data it receives. That tires it down. These are just 2 examples. There are several other.
And you mentioned in there that originally it was only engineers that were required. But I'd said in the introduction that your qualification is in architecture and engineering. How much do those 2 things, or should those 2 things, go hand in hand?
If you ask me, it's essential, but that's because of my education and background. In Hungary, where I grew up, obviously architects needs to know about the structural engineering, needs to know about composite materials, lighting, electricity, plumbing, all kinds of things, not necessarily to design it ourselves, But in order to create the kind of design which involves everyone, at the end of the day, an architect should be someone who sees the whole picture, understands all the fields, all the disciplines, and able to help to all those disciplinary experts to talk to each other, to create a coherent and feasible design. There are several examples which proves that, I don't know, a plumber who does HVAC, air conditioning, ventilation, they don't necessarily understand the architecture design itself. So you need to make sure that they understand, and they also understand the electrical experts' requirements or hopes or what they need, and you need to fit it into the structural engineering and everything else. So that's what I really love in architecture, that I need to understand and I need to learn about everything else. Like for space, I had to learn about the physiology and medicine and satellites, low economy, although those are not my favorite, because at the end of the day, these little bits and bobs will create the whole.
We were speaking there about different tools to use, and earlier you were speaking about space debris, which in my head always links into this thing. This is maybe a wee bit of a curveball question, but something that pops up in sci-fi books quite often, and people talking about the future, is the idea of a space elevator, being able to ride from Earth up into space. So I've got two questions on this. One of them is, how feasible an idea is that? Like, is it an actual possibility? But also, in my head, I'm always thinking, you know, if you've got this elevator track going up and you've got all that space debris, that might tie into the first question actually about how feasible it is. But is this a genuine idea that could work? Do you know?
Hopefully we will see that in 2050, because the Japanese government intends to build a space elevator by 2050. So we will see. There are new nanofiber materials. I don't remember, carbon nanofiber. I don't remember the exact name of it. But with that, it's very, very strong, very, very light. But the science behind a space elevator, basically you are having an object in geostationary orbit, which obviously means that from that point, you always see the same spot on Earth, so it doesn't move related to Earth. So if you tie those 2 points together, then it's not going to move. It's going to move, but with the same rate. So if this material is very light, so it's easy to launch or easy to let down, again, we'll see what the Japanese are going to do to manufacture it, but also very, very strong, then it seems feasible. Regarding the space debris, really depends on how high you are going and how fast the space debris go related to your space station, stationary space station. But by 2050, I certainly hope we are not just getting rid of new space debris, but we will find ways to eliminate everything we can find. The problem with this, because obviously there are bigger parts you can see with a telescope from Earth, you can identify it, and obviously there are like the orbit and other companies who are working on collecting space debris, which would be very profitable, to be honest, because these contain rare materials, very precious metals. So you can use it not just for the satellite industry, but you use it in your phone, not you, telephone manufacturers. So that would be good to bring it back, but that brings up the space law part. Who owns it?
So we've spoken about your present, and we've spoken a bit there about the future with space architecture, with the elevator and the collection of the debris. So now I'm going to go backwards into your past. Where did your interest in STEM come from?
Apart from me inheriting a mathematician's brain from my mom, her struggle in Hungary to get ahead in the field of mathematics as a woman, as a young woman, being a genius, it wasn't easy among the older men, but she made her way, and the way she thinks is amazing. So I was always inspired by her. I never felt that I can't do whatever I want. She also wanted me to become a mathematician. I have to say that. She was clear about that. And I know that she felt a little hurt when I kept telling her that it's just, you know, very one straight field, and I want to discover everything else. But that discovery is, I think, what is necessary to find whatever you like, whatever fits into your personality, what makes you happy. My grandma on my dad's side was a designer, a textile designer. I didn't know her. She died when I was 2, but those skills, drawing, creating, making enamel pictures, remain with me. I always wanted to do something, not just using my hands, but using my creativity, combined with the mathematics. That led me to 2 things, either digital design or graphics design, which I didn't want to do at that time. I would be so rich if I went with that. Or the other way was architecture. It's not like I always dreamt to become an architect. It was just combining mathematics and drawing. And my interest, although I really can't think like a physicist, but that interest, you know, the science. I maybe mentioned that I was introduced to nuclear physics when I was 12, and it was very exciting to do something very special which helps people. But I also realized that that's not my field of expertise. I can't really think that way. But I also, again, now in space radiation, I can rely on everything I learned as a 12-year-old, and it doesn't feel alien. It feels like I'm going home. So everything you try, even if it doesn't work out, even if you realize that it's not really your thing, it will add to your knowledge, it will add to your skill set. So with architecture, as I said, it's seeing the big picture, but understanding all the different pieces, how they will fit together. That is exactly what I like, that what excites me. So I would also suggest that to everyone. Just give it a go.
And it's great that you found something to combine your different strengths and interests, but it's also great that you had obviously such an inspirational STEM role model at home, even though you ended up going down a different path, but you still had that inspiration there. Outside of the home, have you got any STEM heroes that you've looked up to?
I mean, I'm lucky being a Hungarian in that regard. We have probably the most Nobel Prize winners. So Ede Teller, who I actually met when I was 12, working in nuclear physics on a nuclear physics project. He came to the US to visit my school, and we were introduced to him. But also János Neumann, who is John von Neumann. he was called in the US, I think. So obviously different Hungarian people in the Manhattan Project were heroes I could look up to, because they were working on something which was really difficult, challenging, required team effort, which is basically space. And they achieved something significant, even if it's not really what they wanted at the end of the day. So I had these heroes growing up, and obviously with my mom being a mathematician, I was taught about the big mathematicians in our time, or in my mom's time. But later on, as my interest in space started, I wouldn't say late, because obviously I grew up with science fiction books and my name means star. So I always felt attracted by the night sky. But my interest in space architecture or the space industry started with me looking for more challenges. That's one thing I realized over the decades, that I always need challenges. It doesn't really matter what kind of challenges. Moving to a new country, or just trying to figure out the way how to deal with different solutions, I needed challenges. And trying to figure out how to solve artificial gravity, how to resolve the space syndrome, space sickness, with using artificial gravity. And from then on, I joined the Space Architect organization, trying to learn more about the fascinating environment of space. And I found another hero, Constance Adams, who is unfortunately not with us anymore. She worked at NASA as an architect. She had masters in architecture. She worked at NASA. She was basically one of the biggest space architects who weren't called a space architect, because back in those days there was not really a consideration for space architects. So she was someone I looked up. But right now I'm working with other brilliant pioneers like Olga Banova, who is the director of SIGSA, is the Saskava International Course of Architecture at the University of Houston. So that's the first master's, the first program which provides you with a master's degree in space architecture. And her work is brilliant. Her knowledge is amazing. And we are collaborating on different research papers focusing on how to tackle space radiation with architectural means. So I get to work, I get to talk with my heroes, both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, because there are some in Europe as well. So I feel I'm pretty lucky.
And having a name which means star, and then with a surname like Gulacsi, which obviously sounds so much like galaxy, I suppose working in the space sector was, pardon the pun, in the stars for you in your future. So this is bringing us nicely around to the last question that I always ask my guests, and you touched on this a wee bit in one of your answers earlier. But what advice would you give to children and young people who are perhaps a bit interested in STEM but not sure what to do or where they can go with it?
I would suggest, in general, just to try it. Just to try to find a teacher, a parent, maybe not your parent, but a friend's parent who is doing something you are interested in. Ask them to go and visit their work, because it's never like you imagine. Whatever profession you are interested in, it's never what you imagine it is. So go and try to have a look. Go and try to understand what that involves and what kind of subjects, meaning physics, literature, what do you need to learn in order to get there. It might involve things you don't like, but if you really want to get there, just try to give it a go. Maybe it's not going to be as bad as you think. But even with me, like the physics, try it. If you don't like it, you don't have to go with it. Again, failure is not really something negative. It's something you learn from. That's the only thing you can learn from.